Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Speech Language Pathology and Audiology and Hearing Aid Dispensers Board meeting. We will begin our meeting. It's November 30th, 2023 at 1:05 p.m. And the board is in Sacramento at the Department of Consumer Affairs office. And we would like to take roll. Charisse, can you please do the roll call?
Absolutely. Holly Kaiser.
Here.
Todd Borges.
Here.
Karen Chang.
Here.
John Danderin. Gilda Dominguez. Charles Sanders.
Here.
Tulio Valdez. Amy White.
Here.
And you have a quorum established.
Thank you, Charisse. First on our agenda is we are going to be swearing in our new board member, and we'd like to provide a warm welcome to Dr. Charles Sanders, Doctor of Audiology. Dr. Sanders is from he's in Elk Grove, and he's a licensed audiologist and was appointed to the board by Governor Gavin Newsom on November 16th, 2023. Dr. Sanders has been supervisory audiologist for the Veterans Health Administration, Northern California region since 2022. He has been an instructor and in the Department of Communicative Sciences and Disorders at Sacramento State since 2006. He worked at Gold Country Hearing from 2017 to 2022 and at Whisper Hearing Center from 2003 to 2017. He has been a dispensing audiologist in California since 2003. Dr. Sanders earned a Doctor of Audiology degree from Salus University in Pennsylvania in 2007 and master's degree in audiology from Sacramento State in 2003. He is a member of the California Academy of Audiology, American
My apologies, but we do not have any sound for the meeting from the hearing room. There, we're back. Thank you.
I'm sorry you were unable to hear that. We would like to ask if there's any public comment at this time.
And if there is anyone in the public who would like to make a comment on WebEx, you may look for either the hand icon, click that to raise your hand, or you may look for the question mark icon, click that, type the word comment into the text box and click send. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to speak. Are there any comments? All right, I do not see any comments. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing that there are no comments, we will go ahead and we will be going into recess. The next meeting will be the Audiology Practice Committee meeting.
Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the Audiology Practice Committee. We'll start with our roll call. Karen Chang.
Here.
Dr. Valdez. Dr. Sanders.
Here.
Great. We're good to go. So first, we'd like to start with public comment for items that are not on the agenda.
Moderator,
And
if you could open the
just-
public comment.
Yeah, this is the moderator. If anyone in the public in the room would like to make a comment, you may approach the desk at the front of the room, and each person will have 3 minutes to speak. And if you are attending via WebEx and you'd like to make a comment for any item that's not on the agenda, you can look for the question mark icon, click that and type the word comment, or you can look for the hand icon, click that to raise your hand. Each speaker again will have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning. And I see that we do not have public members in the room, so I do not see any requests for comment from WebEx attendees. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move to item number 3 on the agenda. That's discussion and possible action to amend regulations regarding general application requirements and speech language pathology and audiology aid requirements as stated in Title 16, California Code of Regulations, sections 1399.151.2, 1399.151.3, 1399.151.4, 1399.154 through 1399.154.12 and 1399.157. I believe Maria is going to present the information.
Thank you, Dr. Y. Maria, Legislation Regulation Analyst. The committee directed board staff to work with DCA Regulations Council to draft regulatory language to clarify the scope of practice and supervision for audiology aids, as well as implement statutory changes for aids as a result of the board sunset bill. The statutory changes creates the new renewal requirement for aids. And as for the renewal will be a biannual, so every 2 years, and would require the supervisors to update the board on the duties of the aides and their training program as well. In the board memo, you'll see a summary of changes made to the regulations according to what was discussed at the last audiology practice committee. We do have questions, issues for considerations, which is regarding the industrial aid. The audiology practice committee wanted more information on the hearing conservations program. So we do have that information there. And then clarifying questions for the language. So the proposed changes is in attachment A. And then attachment B has the prior draft language from 2015 that was incorporated into those proposed changes. So I can go item through item by section, or we could just go down the memo.
Probably by section in this case, there's a lot.
All right. So the first section to this regulations is we added a couple sections to start codifying our application process. So you'll notice that there's a section for expedited licensure registration process. There's also a section for disclosure of discipline and conviction. And then there's also a section for fingerprinting. So page 1, 2, 3, and 4 are general application requirements. And so we're creating them as new sections because in the future, as we start to clean up our regulations and codify other applications, we could cross-reference that section. So the language is pretty much language that we created with DCA. There's not much we can really do to go around, like to suggest any changes other than what legal requires us to have in there. So we don't really need to go into details of that section, but so that you know what's happening. On page 5 of 16, there are changes to the definitions. They're mostly including just the dispensing audiologist, so since we do have the 2 license type. In here, we do have that definition of industrial audiology aid. So that is an area that the committee can consider amending. since there was discussion about what that definition should look like. And so on in the memo, there is a background information on that I can share about. Essentially, what the committee can do is that they can align the industrial aid to the requirements of technician under the Department of Industrial Relations Hearing Conservation Program. The DIR requires that the employers administer this program whenever when there's ever an exposure that exceeds a certain level. And so audiometric tests performed under this program can be conducted by a licensed or certified audiologist, otolaryngologist, and other physician, or by technicians who are certified by the Council of Accreditation in Occupation Hearing Conservation, or who has satisfactorily demonstrated competency in administrating these examinations, audiograms, and properly using, maintaining, and checking the audio meters. The DRR do require that the technicians who perform these must be responsible, must be under the supervision of an audiologist, otolaryngologist, or a physician. And these technicians are permitted to compare each annual audiogram with the baseline audiogram to determine if the audiogram is valid and if standards threshold shift as defined by the DIR's regulations. It could be that the committee can consider redefining what we currently have for 1399.14D to make it either acknowledging this group category or incorporating some language used here. So that is there for discussion by the committee.
Want to take up that item for discussion regarding health technicians that are industrial aides specifically, and whether or not that should be included under all the same language. That's essentially what we're asking, right? If they should be included under all the same language for supervision purposes, et cetera. Did we have any ability to see how many industrial aides are registered with the state? We can't see that. It's just an audiology aid.
All we track is actually by aides. So actually, in order to find out how many audiology aides, we have to actually look up different qualifications just to split up speech and audiology. We don't have any identifiers in our system if they're industrial or not.
Yeah, and then it would probably be the Council of Accreditation of Occupational Hearing Conservation would probably have data on that, but I wasn't, they didn't have like an Excel spreadsheet for me to like compress the data. So it was kind of just like a list of names and are certified in California.
So that was another question that I had that I wasn't sure was clear, or if you guys have the information on that. Is an industrial aid required to have KOC certification to be an industrial aid to be used by these companies?
No, they can, as in the regulations, it says they can be certified or have satisfactorily demonstrated competency. So that's would be like our licensed, our registered aides. So those would, so it could either, I could see it being either you're accredited or yeah, you're certified by the council or you're a registered aide with the board.
I mean, Dr. Sanders can weigh in here too. My understanding with KOC is, you know, it's a separate certification program. There's testing involved, there's educational requirements involved, and there's recertification requirements involved every couple of years, is my understanding. Which is very different than what we're talking about for an audiology aid, our regular audiology aid. So I'm just not sure if I'd like to hear thoughts on whether or not it should kind of be mushed together or if it really needs to be separated, or if we're able to separate it. I don't know kind of what the parameters are of what we're allowed to do.
An option that I was thinking is an exemption where we say people who are certified for this purpose are exempt from our certain parts of the regulations or all of it. So that's where that's also an option that the committee can go to is by just exempting those who are accredited for this purpose.
Okay, and that we're able to do that.
Yes.
That, again, let me know, Karen or Dr. Sanders, that makes the most sense to me in that we're trying to regulate and make sure that audiology aides in general are properly supervised and have proper training plans in place, but KAOC is like a completely different entity with all these other requirements. So it doesn't seem like it would be reasonable to have to apply additional supervision requirements and additional education requirements on them. They already doing that through a different vein.
As a public, can you give me what does KAOC?
Yeah, sure. So KAOC is the Council of, back here.
Accreditation and occupational hearing conservation.
So KAOC training is meant for usually aides who work in industrial settings who, so if we're in a manufacturing facility and we're exposed to a lot of loud noise as employees, then OSHA requires we have our hearing monitored. And so these aides generally do that hearing screenings to monitor to see if there's been any change in hearing. The KAOC training also trains aides on how to do ear mold impressions so that they can create hearing protection, so earplugs and things like that to be used in those facilities. So it's a pretty involved training. The training is usually, I think, always by an audiologist, a KAOC certified audiologist doing the trainings. And most of them are through Department of Defense uses a lot of these KAOC technicians. That's how they monitor the soldiers a lot. So it's really common in DOD, and I think that's where most of it is.
Do the audiology aides, would they be doing a lot of stuff that is trained to do?
I think that's an interesting question, and I don't know that I know the answer. You know, here,
There's a list about here.
does KAOC certification allow for these aides to be doing ear mold impressions so that they can make hearing protection, which is part of the training? Are they doing that in practice, and is that okay?
There's a list here on page 13 of what's outside the scope of audiology aid.
Right.
The ones that we're proposing on page 13.
Yeah.
I think it's that the audiology aides that we register are often not doing the same work that these industrial audiology aides are doing. So they are pretty separate.
Are the industrial audiology aides, do they go through?
Most of the time, we're getting them for supervisors in their office, like they're working at a location under at their hearing aid office or something like that. So most are actually, it's my audiology aid at my private practice, and that's what I use.
Right, and they're not necessarily KAOC certified. They often aren't because the KAOC is really specific to that noise monitoring process. And I would figure those are large entities that are doing that.
Couldn't think of a lot of practices that would have that kind of specialty in there also.
So why would we, or we don't? I don't see the Department of
Meaning that it might be worth updating our definition of an industrial audiology aid to match more of the Department of Industrial Relations or
Yeah, so I would suggest that maybe industrial audiology aid means a technician who's certified by KAOC.
so kind of circling back to DIR because they're the ones who are taking care of most of this and certifying this, and just specifying that, you know, these regulations aren't particular to them. They have their other set.
that one sentence.
Yeah, I think so. And that would just be added to the definitions to make it a little clearer. Because I think it's always been innocuous and not something we really touch on.
Yeah, and I mean, there's other areas where there is reference of like requirements for industrial aid, but I think by defining them as, you know, they're the technician certified by this group. They're under this other entity, I think will that that jurisdiction of yeah, responsibilities from the board to where they're generally are normally at, which is the Department of Industrial Relations.
So is that something that we need to open up for public comment, or we can continue to discuss all of these items further and open up at the end?
You can do either. You can wait till the end until I'm looking around. I don't see any public in the room, but if you think there are other times that you'd like to hear, you can certainly.
So Maria, if I could ask you just to continue with your review, and then at the end, we can kind of summarize and then open for public comment.
So the next section that's being updated is the 1399.154.1 regarding registration aids. And so for this one, we do have we're in narrative form codifying our application process or what we collect on the application. So just the name, the address, disclosure of information, supervisor's information. So they're kind of similar to like the first three section when it comes to application. We work with our legal counsel to make sure that they're legally binding and accurate. So there's not much that can be discussed about those. And yeah, so that's what's going on here. And then in 1399.154.2, we are separating the SLP audiology from SLP. And so here we just remove all the language regarding audiology, and we're creating a separate section. 1399.154.3 is the maximum numbers of aids. Instead of creating a section, I just split the two practices into different, their own subsections. And so currently we have for aides that a supervisor shall not supervise more than 3 aides, and they're authorized more than 3 aides if in the discretion of the supervisor. This is an area of discussion the committee might want to consider about the number of supervision, since the board has recently proposed changes to like SLIPA and full-time and part-time. So that is an area for review.
Would you please remind us what the changes were for SLIPA supervision and trainees? And I know we've been working on all of that.
So for SLIPAs, they define their for supervision, they defined it for numbers of support personnel. So support personnel is SLIPAs and SLP aides. And then they have no more than 3 full-time equivalent, or 3 full-time equivalent, no more than 6. So they can have 6 part-times or 3 full-time or a combination. For audiology aid, the only thing we were thinking was maybe considering hearing aid dispensers trainee and temporary license. It could be that, dispensing audiologists, they can have probably a combination. So is that something that should be considered in the language of like creating the maximum and
Essentially defining what the support personnel are for dispensing audiologists.
So I think the question is, as we've defined kind of the maximum number of support personnel that can be supervised by any one provider, professional, under speech pathology, ought we to do the same under audiology and just kind of group, is it reasonable to group aides, trainees, hearing aid dispenser trainees, aides, anyone that would be under the supervision of that one single provider?
Full-time equivalent, is that just
no, full-time equivalent would be like if you have two part-times, they're one full-time or
So you
one.
still need a definition of.
Yeah, you would need the definition for that if that's what you want, or it could just be three aides and that's it. Um, or yeah, it could be that. I know that for SLIPA or for the practice of speech language pathology, there was a great need for more SLIPAs because a lot of SLIPAs are working part-time because they're going to school to be an SLP. So I don't know if that's a need in the audiology practice. So it may be that three is sufficient for most audiologists, and that it would be for dispensing audiologists, it would be the three and then the one trainee or temporary licensee, because it would just default to the other regulations for those requirements. So
I think the hard part is the question of, do we want to put the flexibility in the regulation now, in case that it does become a need? Obviously, it doesn't seem to be such a need in the field right now for audiology side as it is for speech language pathology, but we don't know what that'll look like in the next decade. And if there is that flexibility and people want to do part-time work, or, you know, they have kids, they want a part-time schedule, you could have more aides that way.
Right, and I think having that flexibility for part-time is important. Because I do believe a lot of the use of audiology aids is going to increase, especially in the state as we've had our increase in AUD programs, and then students that aren't quite ready to go to their AUD programs and would seek, you know, jobs as an aide or job as an aide while they're going through their programs. So I think it's reasonable, in my opinion, to have a similar requirement as we are the speech language pathologists, of, you know, the same numbers, and kind of use that same language for consistency. I don't know. What do you think? Supervising is supervising.
Just one quick question though. So if a supervisor can only, they also in addition have the dispenser.
Currently could have 3 aides, and then they could have a hearing aid trainee.
So
One.
that's four.
They could have 4 right now.
Okay.
I
And
don't
then-
know anybody that does, personally, but it is currently at 4.
Okay.
So there's that consideration, although I don't know that expanding it much helps, because if their hearing aid trainee does not pass their examinations, they have to go to 100% supervision.
Oh.
So that's kind of that one center right there.
But to clarify, are we suggesting we have all support all of those types of trainees, aides, everyone that needs supervision as part of that 3 or 6 count? Is that what we're asking?
That's the other question too, yes.
That's
Does the
actually what I'm
HT add to
asking.
the support personnel? Are they included in it, or are they separate?
That's actually what I'm asking. Yeah. Well, if you guys aren't using, and not that many people are using 4 total, I don't think. But future, can put it in there, flexibility, so we don't have to.
Matter of capacity. So if you did have 4 and do your own, that's a lot,
Right,
probably too much.
right. So what do you think about aligning it with the language for the speech language pathologist, where it's a max of 3 FTE or 6 part-time, whatever?
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
be a total of 3, including the hearing aid dispensing trainee.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay.
That's what define it.
If there aren't any more questions on this section, we can move on to the next one, which is 1399.154.4. Again, we're splitting out, since we're splitting the practice, we are making this one just training of SLP aides, and then there's a different section being created for the training of audiology aids.
Did the section for audiology aids has it been created yet?
Yeah, we'll get to it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm just going down through the sections. So we're on page 9 of 16.
Oh, there it is. I
There's
see it.
that 1399.154.5 notice of termination. We're just codifying the form. So that's all the information that we collect on the form. The next section is 1399.154.6. Just cleaning up the language for the purpose of going through the process, the regulatory process. 1399.154.7. We made some, we updated, the codes were updated. So the statutory laws that are being referenced, we did update those. And then we also are recommending that the also includes fieldwork experience required for a SLIPA license to not be included. Actually, that's for the next committee. But again, in the process of when we're making regulations and changing regulations, we're also cleaning it up. So we are doing this package as not just only the audiology aid, but also this SLP aid, because we are making those changes, and the public has the ability to comment on those. So that's why you see so much, like a lot of the SLP, because it's going to be part of the packet. So the next few sections are the new sections specifically for audiology aid. So 13.145.8 is the list of responsibilities of an audiology aid supervisor. And this is just, a lot of these were pulled from that text from 2015, which is attachment B, that we've put it in here. 1399.154.9 is the supervision of audiology aid. And then we also have the training, which is 1399.154.10, which is page 12 of 16. Page 13 of 16 is the activities that are outside of the scope. We've listed that. I think there was a lot of acronyms in there, so I put what the words are to the acronym. If we can get some verification from the audiologist that those are what they are. Yeah, the VNG, the ENG, and the AD. And then to implement the statutory changes, we do have a section for registration renewals. These are information we'll be collecting on the form that we will create. We also have an effective date. So we are recommending a full year after the regulations is in place to create the form, get it tested, and because to get the form created, and then getting it implemented and having people who are registered before a time period, we'll have them do their renewals, and then we'll start that biannual renewal cycle. And then we also have a fees, the 1399.157, to also include the renewal fee, since we can collect a fee for renewing. We have it set at the same amount as the initial registration. And you'll also see that there's additional language for a fee waiver for applicants who qualify that, which I believe are military spouses. So there's that language and what we collect for that purpose.
So would you like to go back to the discussion questions on page 3?
Yeah, we could do that. I think there's only a couple more questions I have. Let's see, we're going to be looking at page. Okay, so on page 10 of 16 of the text, we do need some clarifying information on what it means that, there's a phrase, future depositions of patients under, 1399.14.8D, towards the end of page 10 of 16, that that our legal would like a bit clarification what that is. We believe it might be outdated language that might just needs to be updated. So just what would that language should look like? That's the case.
I believe that when it says evaluate, treat, manage, and determine the future dispositions of the patients, if you took out the future dispositions, you just said evaluate, treat, and manage patients. I don't know that future dispositions is meaningful language.
We weren't sure if it was like a discharge from a treatment plan or something along those lines. Because sometimes in the speech side, it'll say, you know, like I think it's about discharging or determining when to stop treatment and those kind of questions. So I think we had an idea of what it was intended to be, but not quite.
Yeah, I don't think that's part of it. Evaluation, treatment, management, right, the determination of the dispositions, treatment in the future. A lot of times audiology treatment doesn't end.
Right.
Are you saying it doesn't end?
It-
It doesn't
no.
end, not end.
Based on your mortality.
Oh,
Continue your
maybe that's why they have it.
If
Or-
we
or-
had to say it in a more clear way and leave it in there, how would we say it?
I think treatment plan is good.
Treatment plan?
Determine, evaluate, treat, manage, and determine the future treatment plan of patients.
So maybe evaluate, manage, and determine.
Isn't the determination of the future deposition part of evaluating, treating, and managing, right?
That, I think that's what we're sort of saying, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it seems, yeah, okay. Yeah, that's what we were thinking that maybe was redundant. We can also end it with, in, let's see, the definition of an aid, it talks about, individual, with hearing disorder. So it's, evaluate, treat, and manage patients' hearing disorder or something like that. I don't know, is that necessary?
I mean, you could say determine required referrals or necessary referrals. I don't, but that's part of evaluate, treat, and manage. So I just feel like evaluate, treat, and manage kind of is.
Okay. Evaluate, treat, and manage patients.
That's also, that same phrase is back on page 8D.
Yeah, we'll have the SLP look at that, the language, since that's regarding SLP aids. Yeah, so that is a question we'll ask them as well.
So would we want to say evaluate, treat, and manage patient care?
Yeah, I feel like there's something missing. I can't quite put the word to it. Like, yeah, the
Sentence kind of
care.
properly. Sorry. So you're evaluating, treating, and managing patient care or patient.
Treating patient care.
That's true.
Right, it looks
Just
like something's
evaluate,
missing.
treat, and manage
Yeah,
patients.
The
Would be
patient.
evaluate the treatment and management of patient care. It's the supervisor evaluating the treatment and management. Is it the supervisor doing the evaluation?
The aid is not evaluating or treating, right? Because they're just assisting in tasks. They're not doing the evaluation or the treatment. The supervisor is doing the evaluation and treatment and management of the patient. Right?
So then the supervisor treat and manage all patient care.
Yes. That's a good one.
So would the final language be evaluate, treat, and manage all patient care?
That makes me feel better about the sentence.
As long as you feel better.
Does the committee wish to specify that if an aide has more than one supervisor, that supervisor should also register the aide using the same form? I don't know how common it is to have multiple or aides with multiple supervisors.
It is currently somewhat common and it will be at different locations. And so they'll have one supervisor registered to them and then another one. So they'll have two aid registrations at the same time. So that way it's really clear you're always registered to that supervisor.
I think there should. I think they should register to both.
Yeah, so I'll make sure there's language in there regarding.
They don't operate as a quasi independently as SLPAs, so they don't have like multiple supervisors in the same location. It's just different.
So the committee might want to consider some requirements that we require for RP supervision and SLPA supervision for aides. And so if you go to page 2 of 3 of the memo, you'll see some suggested language of what those requirements that aren't here that could be added. The first one was regarding a practice experience requirement. That's something that the board recently proposed for SLPA. That could be something the committee can consider for audiology aid. Another one is notifying the aid of, any disciplinary action. That's also included in the SLPA supervisor's responsibility. We also have CPD requirements or continuing education requirements that can also be included for supervisor of aides. And then we also have the review of laws and regulations with the aid, as well as providing aid with a plan for how to handle emergencies. And so those are additional requirements that could be added to the supervisor.
And that supervision CPD, the continuing professional development, we required that also in the hearing aid dispenser trainees supervisors, correct?
Yes, there's proposed changes to require that hearing aid dispensers.
So this would just be consistently making it across the board.
Yeah, and it's because only audiology aides are the only ones who would have aides, and so if that's all they have, then they would be the only supervisors not required for that supervision training.
There's a benefit to some consistency in supervisor training. The one question I'd had, and it's where the audiology side differs, I think, each side. So we had introduced the 3,120 hours of experience because a speech language pathologist, a good majority or a good portion of them work in schools. So the whole 2 years, there's always the summer gap, right? So I wasn't sure if that's still useful on the audiology side or if it's worth putting in there just in case we have part-time audiologists. So I just thought I'd reference that one just to make sure we still think it's applicable to both sides.
There are educational audiologists that follow the same schedule as school speech language pathologists.
Does the committee wish to require practice experience for audiology aid supervisors?
Yes.
Are there any questions with including the other suggested language regarding notifying the aid about the disciplinary action, reviewing the laws and regulations with them, as well as providing them a plan with how to act in emergencies?
That's all relevant. It should be there, yeah.
Since we do have our new member on the audiology team here, it would be good to just make sure we take another look at the activities, duties, functions outside the scope. Just kind of take a good look at that, and then also make sure we got our acronyms. I'm not even gonna try and say
Video and nystagmography. Yeah, no, they're correct.
that. Okay.
Tympanometry. Change to-
That would getting at the same thing. Tympanometry is one part of an impedance battery.
Battery test or impedance battery.
Impedance testing. Tests. And just to clarify, and maybe Dr. Sanders or Karen too, just reading A, you know, says conduct diagnostic evaluations, i.e. all the examples of the testing. In looking at that, would we assume then that preparing a patient for those activities is okay as long as they aren't conducting the activity?
That's how I would have staff interpret it if this was the regulation, is that they can't conduct it, but they can prepare the patient.
Okay.
And of course, clean and fit everything afterwards.
And the only other one I'd like your input on is item K. Independently adjust hearing aids or cochlear implant settings. How do you read that in terms of what an aid would be allowed to do with a hearing aid or a cochlear implant?
I would interpret it as a gain change. It's replaced.
Okay, so
Same thing. I would interpret it as like a
change,
in the volume.
right? Okay, so we would be reading that as if a hearing aid comes back from repair or a cochlear implant comes back from repair and the programming is just needing to be downloaded into the unit, it's already been programmed by the provider previously, then that is acceptable because it's not changing anything. It's just putting the program that already existed back into the device.
I guess. I mean, you're just downloading information, right?
Right, it's already there.
Sure.
They're not changing it. You're just verifying it's in there.
Yeah, the prescription's already been set by the audiologist. You're just putting the prescription.
Just out of curiosity, like, what if it's so obvious that it's too loud? Do you have to go to the audiologist? Like, can you just lower the volume a little?
That's the way it's written. Which is reasonable in the sense of an audiologist or a hearing aid dispenser, you know, has determined what those prescriptive settings should be, and already done those measurements. If we're turning it down beyond what the patient can already control via their own
Oh,
volume
okay.
control, there needs to be a discussion about that and what they might be missing by doing that and the negative impacts that may have on their ability to hear and understand speech.
And the aid can teach the patient, like, this is how you turn the volume down.
And part of the treatment could also be trying to extend that person's ability to hear sounds over time. Maybe asking the patient to tolerate this louder sound for adapt. Want them to have it a little louder than they get to be.
Is there any other comments from either of you on the duties and functions outside the scope for an audiology aid? Clarifications.
This would be like up to the both of you, since you guys are the professionals. Are we missing anything? Could be outside the scope, but
I think L is the only thing that, not only, but is rather ambiguous, but that might be purposeful.
I think usually we want to have some amount of space for what technology comes in the next 10 years. Even though it seems we want to have more and more devices that can help us do things, including I've heard clear out some of the cerumen in your ear with some sort of. But making sure that anything that it still requires a certain level of skill and acumen that they're not doing those things. Right now, cerumen removal have to be kind of the question.
Any other comments about those items?
I do have two more questions for two different sections that I just want to revisit before it's up here. So we're going to be looking at the supervision requirements on page 11 of 16, 1399.154.9. I know there was extensive discussion on the level and amount of supervision, so this is what this section is. There is a reference to industrial audiology that we could probably remove, but I just want to make sure, is there a need to define indirect supervision for audiology aid, or what we should do with, in particularly subsection C, the paragraphs that follow?
I think having all the different types of supervision, immediate, direct, indirect, defined is great, and we should definitely include that. I agree. I think if you're talking about an industrial aid, if our previous discussion stands where the industrial aid is really shouldn't necessarily be in our purview, that belongs elsewhere, that it might make more sense to remove referring to them in here. It makes it confusing too.
Okay, so I do want to note that we don't specify a supervision amount when it comes to indirect. So we may need to remove it, or we may want to see, are there any activities that aid would not need to have a supervisor on site with them?
Do we consider that cleaning a hearing aid, for example, is a duty of an aid, a registered aid? And if so, that would be an example of indirect supervision.
That.
Potentially what, like cleaning instruments?
Cleaning devices.
prepping?
Downloading the programming, the previous settings into a hearing aid.
Also things they could do.
So
I think we'll probably have to specify those activities then, because currently what we have, if you look at page 12 of 16, we define that the first 90-day is immediate supervision at all times. And then after the 90 days or until the supervisor determines competency, it's direct supervision at all times.
So this is where my questions pop up about getting into the weeds, because if we don't have a list of what an aid can do, we do have a list of what they cannot do. So do we then need to figure out how to classify what they can do under the different types of supervision? If we're going to say they can do these particular tasks with indirect supervision, do we really need it? Are we going to be required to specifically spell that out, even though we don't have a list of activities they can do?
We do for immediate supervision, it's activities that are invasive, and so that is defined.
Mhm.
I think with SLIPA, they do define different activities for different level. And essentially what's going to happen is that we won't be able to use this definition because it's not used anywhere else in a regulation. So it's standing on its own. We're not specifying like when indirect supervision happens, essentially. All we're specifying is that it's immediate the first 90 days, and then it's direct after the 90 days, and it's kind of just sitting on its own right now.
I think then we have to address the fact that there can be indirect, so we need to revise E. That's really what we're saying. Oh, that's only direct when they're providing direct client care. But indirect client care is something we would consider the downloading the programming.
Yeah, and the cleaning.
And the cleaning.
It gets muddy, right? Because pairing a hearing aid to a cell phone, which you're just Bluetooth pairing just like any other device, is often a task that's done in the office and would be something that you would want your aide to be able to do
When you're not there.
when you're not there. Mhm.
The consumer is gonna want
Right.
Anytime they come in the door.
insist on somebody.
So do we need to discuss it further, what we would be including in E to help define the things that could be done under indirect supervision, or?
Yeah, we'll probably have to do like in E, maybe provide direct supervision or indirect supervision. I don't
I'm
have time.
actually wondering if we specify what doesn't count as direct client care.
And then, yeah, we'll have to do a list of like indirect client care includes this.
Okay, so now
This-
we need to
this-
do an
this.
inclusive list for that part.
I mean,
That's
when,
where I actually don't, I
Yeah.
think there should be a way to define it to say
Yeah.
that these are the kind of tasks that are not, I'm on the fly here, so I apologize, Karen. I'm just tossing it out here. But I mean, we're not inserting anything in their ear. They're not helping with an ear mold impression. They're not putting on the headsets to do a hearing test. The indirect client care is tasks that are not directly affecting the patient's body, but they are affecting their ability to hear. So such as downloading and pairing.
Um, I, I feel like we had this conversation last time. And I thought that, I think this is really good. The supervisor shall provide direct supervision at all times when the aide is performing direct client care. So in my mind, that is what you said, like touching the ear, blah, blah, blah. And that kind of indirectly defines indirect care.
I think so. It does make a little opening in a weird spot. We'll get questions on it.
Care too would be something that a competent consumer would be easily trained to do themselves. However, the majority of our consumers are competent to manage these things, and so they need assistance, and that's why they come to us, is to gain that assistance. And so the aide should be able to do something.
I think that would think
I think I suggest maybe in E, we add a paragraph 1 that indirect supervision can be provided when the aide is performing indirect client care, such as or including tasks that a consumer
Put on their own,
could provide it on their own.
they themselves are-
Yeah, so
Which would cover most of it except for downloading programming.
Yeah.
When you mentioned downloading programming, they can't do that on their own?
The patient,
Cannot.
the software lives in the,
In
in
the-
a provider's computer. It's a particular
Okay.
program. Unless they have an OTC.
Right.
all those caveats of OTC.
Right, yeah.
I think
I
just
just- I-
sum it up then.
yeah, I think that firms it up. Yeah, because we just talked about indirect supervision, what that looks like, but we didn't talked about in what situations for the aid that would look like. So I think that pretty much, that would cover that. I think that would be a solid approach. And then I do have one more question, but I believe,
I-
yeah.
I'm just, because if we're going to say indirect supervision is what, clients can do by themselves, but also that downloading stuff
As well
as well, then you can
Add
write
as a
as well as downloading that Bluetooth.
I think we would
Or-
provide those as like 3 examples. Yeah. Usually, and correct me if I'm wrong, Karen and council, if you're giving a couple of examples, that's acceptable. As soon as we start making a list, like our activities outside the scope, we need to be more precise because that's kind of the exhaustive list versus here's 2 or 3 examples.
What they're allowing when you say doing items including, and then you list a few things, it always means included, but to trying to reduce the verbiage in regulations.
Says the WebEx moderator. Oh, now we lost hearing. We lost audio in the hearing room. Are we back?
Can you hear us?
When
Okay,
did we
yes.
Yes.
It was only out for 15, 20 seconds.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
The last item is regarding the training of audiology aid. I believe it mentions industrial aids, so I'll just remove it per the earlier discussion.
Yes.
And I don't have any more questions, unless the committee has any other changes it wants to propose or look at. Um, yeah, that's the end of the
Should we summarize the items that we were changing and then open it for public comment? I can do that, or you?
Yeah, I could, a summary of what all the changes, that have been proposed today is that we're going to be amending the definition of industrial audiology, on 1399.154 to mean a technician who is certified by the Council of Accreditation, Occupational Hearing Conservation. We may add a reference as defined by DIR's regulation. That's something I'll talk to our reg attorney as we clean up the language that we're changing. The next change is the on page 7 or under 1399.154.1 registration of aids. We're going to add a section to say that that if the aid has more than one supervisor, the supervisor needs to register their aid using the same form and paying the same fee. The next change is on 1399.154.3, which is page 8 of 16. The committee would like to define support personnel to include audiology aid, hearing aid dispensers, trainees, and temporary licensees. And also defined that is 3 full-time equivalent aides, which is full-time, which is 30 more hours. We'll just essentially use the same language we have in SLIPA. So it's full-time is, I think, 30 hours. And so the language would say shall not supervise no more than 3 full-time or should not supervise 3 full-time equivalent, not to exceed 6, which is what we have for the SLIPA. I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, it distinguishes the 3 full-time as well as the maximum number, which is 6 at one time. The next change is on page 10 of 16, 1399.1548. We are amending subsection D. It will say evaluate, treat, and manage all patient care. On for 1399.154.9, we are removing the definition of indirect supervision for industrial audiology aid, and we will define indirect patient client care. It'll be on subdivision E. We'll add a paragraph saying that indirect supervision shall be provided when the aid is performing indirect client care, such as the programming or and that kind of stuff. So I'll work with legal counsel with that language. And we're also adding to the regulations under the supervision 1399.1548, the requirements of a supervisor to require, they will have to have two years of practice experience or hours equivalent. They must notify their aide that they've got disciplinary action. They'll be required to complete 6 hours of CPD in the first, prior to supervision, and then 3 years every 4 years after that. They'll have to review the law and regulations with their aide, as well as provide them with a plan for how to handle emergencies. And so that will be also added in 1399.1548.
Thank you. Any further discussion on those from the committee?
I have a question for clarification. In my note, for some reason, and it may be that I'm not reading my handwriting, when you talked about restricting how many aides can be had, you had 3 full-time equivalent. I have here that you were saying include a hearing aid dispenser trainee.
So
That language hadn't been in there, is that?
It is not currently in there, so we would need to define that the support personnel that we're speaking of includes a hearing aid dispensing trainee and an audiology aid. So if they have both or multiples, they could have 1 trainee and then they could also have 2, if we're talking full-time, sorry. 1 hearing aid trainee full-time and then 2 audiology aides full-time, part-time equivalents.
Yeah, could you just change the word to supervisees? That supervisor can only supervise 3 people.
You could actually use support personnel and define support personnel right after it. So we could.
yeah, that's how we have
a
it for the SLIPA, is that the language will be changed so that it says that it's 3 full-time equivalent support personnel, no more than 6, and then it'll define support personnel as the aides, the trainee, temporary licensee.
PE is normally included in. support
Yeah, so in
personnel.
this situation, they can have, you'll have your 3 full-time aides, trainee, and then RP is its own regulations, and for RP it's 3.
Again, I don't know that many. certain settings, but yeah.
And again, that's consistent across with speech pathology. Okay. All right, I would like to ask that we open up for public comment. I don't believe there's anyone in the room for public comment. So would we please go ahead and moderator open on WebEx for us?
Certainly. And if there is anyone on WebEx who would like to make a public comment on the discussion, you can look for the question mark icon, click that, type the word comment into the text box and click send, or you may raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. Are there any comments on the discussion?
There are currently none in the hearing room.
Thank you so much. I do not see any requests online either. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
That, I believe this committee is adjourned.
I forgot.
Two 27. Oh, were we muted? Yeah, this is legal counsel Michael Canotes. We're going to take about a 10-minute break before we start the next committee meeting. So let's,
So 2:27 you said, or you want to make it 2:30?
why don't we? Yes.
All right. We'll recess till 2:30 and I'll note the slide. Thank you.
Hello, I'd like to invite everyone to the Speech Language Pathology Practice Committee. And I would like to go ahead and have roll call. I can do this myself. There's two of us. I am Holly Kaiser, chair, and is Gilda Dominguez here. Thank you. So we have a quorum. We are going to be discussing, so hold on one second. Oh,
We're just going to try and
okay, sorry.
catch up to the slides.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. We're going to be discussing agenda item 3, the discussion and possible action to amend regulations regarding scope of responsibility, duties and functions of speech language pathology assistants as stated in Title 16, California Code of Regulations, Section 1399.170.3. Before we discuss this agenda item, I would like to find out if there's any public comments not on the agenda. I see no one in present here for comments. Can the moderator please open it up for public comments?
Certainly, if anyone who's attending by WebEx would like to make a public comment, you may look for the question mark icon, typically in the lower right of your WebEx screen. Click that, type the word comment and click send. The other option is to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. Each speaker will have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning. Are there any comments on anything that is not on the agenda? I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close that public comment feature?
All right, thank you. Now we may continue to talk about agenda item 3 and Maria Lorenzo, our legislation regulation budget analyst. Can you please present this?
Thank you. The SLP committee was requested to review and discuss SLIPA's practice restriction for performing oropharyngeal swallow therapy with bolus material. Currently, SLIPAs are not permitted to perform this procedure pursuant to California Codes of Regulations 1399.170.3 because it requires a high level of clinical acumen and technical skills. Board staff researched neighboring states for their SLIPA practice restrictions, as well as we've also included ASHA's practice restrictions, which you can find in attachment A.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Gilda if you have input on this. This is certainly more in line with your experience than mine.
Note that I think it would be very important to, not that they are scope of practice that the assistants have, scope therapy, occupation. Can you hear me? Okay, now? Okay. Do I need to rephrase? Okay. State. I think it's equally as important, or it would be beneficial to not just look at the neighboring state and ASHA SLPA practice restrictions, but to also look at the scope of practice for occupational therapy assistants and for the physical therapy assistants. It does seem that, at least what I've seen, that they do have a lot of expanded flexibility that assistants have in speech pathology as they are carrying out an established plan of care that has been set up by the RPT, the physical therapist, or by the so I think it would be helpful to look at what type of restrictions they have too, because they are actually carrying out a lot of things from the campus, IADLs as well. For speech pathology assistants specifically, I think it would be very beneficial to expand scope to include this. It could be more regimented. Maybe it's not the first treatment after an assessment, but as someone is progressing through, maybe, I'll throw an example, maybe the QA and do trials of another modified diet like mechanical soft or moist diet or something like that, to see if the client or patient treating person served is following through respiration precautions, safe swallow guidelines, taking their small bites or small sips, alternating their liquids and their foods. But I think it would be beneficial to expand that for this group.
Are there any comments from the public in the room? Seeing none, I'd like the moderator to open up for any public comment.
Thank you. This is the moderator. If anyone would like to make a public comment, you may look for the question mark icon, click that, type the word comment into the text box and click send. The other option is to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. Each speaker will have 3 minutes. Are there any comments? And I do not see any comments. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes, please.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. Again, intervention that includes not changing a plan of care, I think is the important piece to this. That if there is a certain diet level that is being observed during treatment, and there's cueing, again, regarding respiration precautions, safe swallow guidelines, I think that could be appropriate, right? As long as the SLP assistant has been trained, there's competencies that have been established for this. They show that they can identify when there is an adverse reaction or someone is in distress, that they stop the session and they go reach out to their supervisor or is in charge at that time wherever the site they are at. So I do think there's competencies that would need to be definitely established, just as we do for other aspects of care that we provide, speech pathologists, fees, for example. Again, carrying through but not changing anything in the care. It's important to know.
So essentially, maybe looking at something that is saying it's allowed when there's established and documented competencies and maybe some sort of standardized protocols that are in place at the location. It sounds like maybe,
If there's some type of adverse reaction. or
yeah, those
deficiency,
kind of standardized protocols and emergency protocols, something along those lines. It's very clear that it's only for this in these situations and when there is not a change in the intervention that's going on. Something very narrowly crafted.
So we're looking at maybe, it sounds like similar language when it comes to like the emergency backup or something like that.
That's
for
what
them
it sounds
fees.
like.
So yeah, we could definitely prepare for another discussion with a comparison of the OT and PT aides assistants.
But I do have one question though, and it just came to me, and it might be just outside of this conversation. But I understand that there's certain payers that do not pay for services that assistants provide. So say this is, so that would have to be
It's kind
something
of
to look
outside
at,
of our
right? To make sure that this service is not being used to be for population that allows for an SLP assistant to actually. But this conversation, I think that there's competencies, there's a plan of action if there is a problematic situation, and that they know that they are not supposed to deviate from what has been set in that treatment plan at period of time, that frequency of duration.
So it sounds like that the committee wants to propose removing it from the restrictions and maybe creating a new section or adding it to a current section, that the SLPAs can perform this procedures under with a certain level of competency, plan of actions, and then we'll draw from maybe the fees, statutory requirements for some of that language, and then tie it to like the different levels of experience, supervision required. So yeah, we could definitely prepare that for the next meeting if that's what the committee to do.
And I'm curious if we would remove it from outside of the scope or put the caveat unless the or unless something is met in this other section. So you have to, it's prohibited unless you meet this other section, which has these requirements. But we can talk with our regs council about what's kind of the better construction and clearest way to do that.
Gilda, thank you for that very thoughtful explanation and also looking into what the PT assistants and OT assistants do. Sounds to me like Maria captured everything that you've stated, and I agree. with what you've come up with. So I think we can move on to the next agenda item. Agenda item 4 is discussion and possible action to amend regulations regarding general application requirements and speech language pathology and audiology aid requirements as stated in Title 16, California Code of Regulations, sections 1399.151.2, 1399.151.3, 1399.151.4, 1399.154 through 1399.154.12 and 1399.157. And Maria, can you please go through the points?
Thank you, Ms. Kaiser. The Audiology Practice Committee has directed the staff to work with DCA Regulations Council to draft regulatory language to clarify the scope of practice and supervision for audiology aids, as well as implement some statutory changes as a result of the board's sunset. And so because the statutory changes also affects SLP aids, as well as, and we're also amending sections that affect SLP aids, we recommend that the committee review the language to make sure, to give you the opportunity to make changes if you want or clarify anything before it moves forward to the board.
Thank you. And again, the audiology committee thoroughly discussed these points, so they've done a lot of the heavy lifting for us. I see that our discussion questions are, the first one is, should we include requirements be specified for aides with multiple supervisors? If yes, consider adding a new subsection to CCR section 1399.154.1 with suggested language. I believe that there should be a supervisor for, if an aide has more than one supervisor, each supervisor should register the aide as stated in the subsection. Gilda, what are your thoughts about that?
So the audiology practice will also be making or would like to do that change. So it'll be added to 1399.154.1 at the end there.
Okay. And the next item was, what does the phrase future dispositions of patients used in CCR section 1399.154.2B mean? And what other term could be substituted to meet the Office of Administrative Law's clarity standard? I was thinking about this in terms of another phrase could be future care plans. However, listening to the conversation the audiology committee discussed, I think they came up with something very similar about treatment. I do like the idea of keeping future in there because it's really looking at the person holistically, not just how they are now or you expect in 2 weeks from now, but really looking at going on in their life. Bill, do you have any other comments to that?
I was curious about that because on the speech, I mean, on the audiology side, we do expect people to continue to lose more hearing over time, but on speech, you might actually have full recovery, right? You may no longer need swallowing therapy, maybe you no longer need speech therapy. So I don't know if discharged from care is for lack of a better word.
Yeah, we can both answer those questions probably differently. Certainly there's a lot of, so it's yes to both because there are a lot of clients, patients, students that need treatment ongoing, some kind of monitoring, you know, of a long-term issue they need just to learn how to adapt to it, even if you can't, you know, solve the problem, there's always care needed. Gilda?
So like to your point, so that deterrent.
So I think we could move on to the next discussion point.
Oh, so then did you want to go with audiology committee's
Yes.
version?
Yeah,
Okay.
actually, would you mind repeating the actual wording that you decided on?
Yeah, so they decided the audiology practice wanted to revise the statement to say evaluate, treat, and manage all patient care.
I mean, it's inclusive. It's not specifically pointing out future. All in future.
That was my only concern, is that I think sometimes you would be discharging a patient
Right.
and they no longer have treatment
Right.
services.
I,
So-
is there a way we can incorporate future in there so that we're thinking ahead? Or there are different situations. It might be like for a student you see in school and then they're going to be in a job situation that's looking at building towards that future and what they're going to need, for example.
Somewhat by definition, all is a superset.
So it should include everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
All.
that's what I just want to make sure. Okay. All right, so it sounds like we're covered then in terms of meeting everybody's agreement to this. Okay, thank you. All right, so we can move on to the next agenda, next point of discussion. Okay. Should the SLP aid supervision align with supervision requirements for other license/registration types? Any of the following suggested language may be added to CCR section 1399.154.2. And these points were about the supervisor having at least 2 years of experience, notifying the aide immediately of any disciplinary action, including revocation, suspension, probation terms, inactive license, or lapse in licensure, which affects the supervisor's ability or right to supervise, and the completion of a minimum of 6 hours of continuing professional development prior to assuming responsibilities as supervisor, and 3 hours of continuing professional development and supervision every 4 years thereafter. And then reviewing the speech language pathology aid with the SLP aid, the laws and regulations pertaining to supervision and practice of speech language pathology as applicable, and providing the aid with a plan for how to handle emergencies. I would believe that, yes, we should include all of this language. Gilda?
I agree.
Any other comments about that? With,
Sorry, I do want to highlight that we did make amendments to other sections that I don't have questions for, but
Okay.
the committee can review, which is 1399.154.3 regarding the maximum numbers of aides. We will be cross-referencing the SLIPA regulations,
Right.
which defines the support staff, and
Yep.
the proposed changes are still in the review process, but they're the cross-reference, so we're not duplicating requirements. There's also a section on training of SLP aides that the committee can review and discuss any changes if necessary. And then on page 10 of 16, 1399.154.7, we're also including SLIPA fieldwork experience as or aid experience cannot count as a SLIPA fieldwork experience.
let's go through one at a time so we can just check through them. So the first one you presented, can you give us the page number?
Page 8 of 16.
Okay, yeah, so the number of assistants or personnel that could be hired was consistent with what we had already stated before. I am fine with not changing that. I don't know about Gilda, what are your thoughts about that? Yeah, the 3
Equivalent,
FTEs,
yeah.
no more
Yeah,
than
so currently the regulations for aides was like the
Mm-hmm.
no more than 3 speech aid, which is a bit in conflict of what the proposed changes for the SLIPA supervision. So it's just do a cross-reference to that section.
Okay.
So that's where we have just that one
Okay.
sentence there to cross-reference for the purpose of clarity.
All right. The next one be.
Page 9 of 16 is the training of SLIPA, SLP aides. it's open for discussion if the committee would like to make any changes to it. We don't have any recommendations since the goal of this package was really to update the audiology aids. So we don't have any recommendation.
Okay, I'm just trying to reference what the requirements are. I know the supervisor works with the aide in terms of what they need to be taking.
So the supervisor, when it comes to training, they're supposed to give them instructions on the skills necessary to perform it, demonstrate it, also determine the level of competency. So that's,
Okay,
I
and
mean,
B.
I don't know if any of it needs any changing for SLP, or if it needs to be stated differently, but that's generally what it's a on the job
Right.
kind of training.
Which
And
makes sense
documented.
to me still.
Document.
So that sounds fine. The next one?
We're looking at page 10 of 16, 1399.154.7.
Okay,
Aid experience not applicable for qualifications for licensure.
right.
Currently, it just only had the RPE. We're also going to include the SLIPA fieldwork experience by cross-referencing the section as well.
Okay. So their experience will now count towards their field experience that's required for SLP.
That's correct. So they can't be employed as an aid
Right.
and use that as their experience for a SLIPA license.
Right. That makes sense to me too.
Believe it or not, we get that question quite often.
Okay.
So adding it in just helps clarify it.
Okay. Yeah.
So we'll get people that, oh, well, this is my field work. And we're like, but you're an aide. That
No.
doesn't, it's not.
Right.
So.
Is there any-
That was all the sections specifically for SLP. Aids, I know that the committee expressed that there's not so many of them, so there was an intention to make too much changes to it. So it's a lot of just cleaning up, updating language, outdated language for it. So.
Great.
At the next meeting, we'll just bring the clean language back so that you could see the final version.
I'd like to ask for any comments for public in the room. Seeing none, can the moderator please open up for comments?
Certainly. We've opened up the WebEx Q&A feature to facilitate public comment. If you'd like to make a comment, you can look for the question mark icon, type the word comment in that text box and click send, or you may also raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. Each speaker will have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning. Are there any comments on this issue? And I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
All right. I think we've covered all the issues for today. So with that, I would like to adjourn this meeting of the Speech Language Pathology Practice Committee. Thank you. Call to order the Speech Language Pathology and Audiology and Hearing Aid Board meeting this afternoon. We are in Sacramento. Our board is present, and it is now 2:59. We're going to first call a roll, and Sharice, can you help with that, please?
Absolutely. Holly Kaiser,
Here.
Todd Borges,
Here.
Karen Chang. Here. John Danduran, Gilda Dominguez,
Here.
Charles Sanders,
Here.
Tulio Valdez, Amy White.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is for public comments for items not on the agenda. So I would like to ask the public present here, does anyone have any comments about items not on the agenda? Seeing none, can we please have the moderator open up for comments?
Certainly. If there are any comments for items not on the agenda, our WebEx attendees can either click the hand icon to raise their hand or they can click the question mark icon, type the word comment and click send. And just as a point of information for the board members, the representative from Human Resources, Olivia Trejo, is on her way over to do the closed session portion of the meeting. And I do not see any requests for comment at this time. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
So this will be the shortest meeting ever. We are finished with our business for this afternoon. We will meet again tomorrow at 9 a.m. And with that, I would like to close this meeting of the Speech Language Pathology and Audiology and Hearing Aid Dispensers Board. Thank you.
Michael Connotes, legal counsel. That's almost exactly right. We're going to go into closed session and then we will be adjourning the meeting following closed session for today. So for members of the public, this concludes the public portion of the meeting for today, and that will resume at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Thank you so much.
And this is the WebEx moderator. The WebEx portion of this meeting will be closing now. Thank you.